our YouTube channel. Looking very Hawaiian here. And we'll have a chance to share with folks what it is that you're doing. So I am welcoming Kurt Lieber today, and he is founder and president. He says a fancy title for a one-man job, but founder and president of Ocean Defenders, which is based here in Laguna Beach, and Huntington Beach. Huntington Beach, pardon me. And Kurt does a lot of work here along our coast, as well as some other unique areas, but principally here. And Kurt's going to share with us today how he is helping to save dolphins and whales. So welcome, Kurt.
Thanks for having me. This is great.
Oh, we're happy to have you. Kurt, one of the reasons why I was so interested in having you join us is because for probably the last 12 or 13, 15 years now, Dave learned actually from Captain Tom Southern, who was our senior captain, that at the time there were nearly 1,000 dolphins and whales dying in fishing gear and nets every day around the world. And when Dave first heard that number, he said, Tom, that can't be right. I don't know where that number's coming from, but that can't be right. And Tom said, no, it is right. You should see the report. And most recently, last week, on one of the interviews that I did, that number's actually changed, and they believe that it's gone up from 320,000 a year to now maybe in the neighborhood of 400,000 a year. So we're seeing a lot of cetaceans, and that's just cetaceans, dolphins and whales. That doesn't include sea turtles, birds, any of that. And many of the time, these are actually live nets or gear, not ghosting, but they can be ghosting. And either way, they present a huge problem for the animals that are trying to live off of our coast. So first, thank you for doing what you do, for getting this gear and net out of the way so that these animals can live free. And welcome. I want to hear all about it.
Well, where do I begin? I guess the beginning of my awakening, just to give you a bit of background here.
Yeah, tell us.
Too detailed here, but I grew up in Chicago and was infatuated with the marine life that I was seeing in tanks. I'd go to the Shed Aquarium and all that kind of stuff that was turning me on as a young kid to what was out in the oceans. Of course, Chicago's right on Lake Michigan, and then in '67, my family moved to Cleveland, where we had a house that was right on Lake Erie. I'm talking my backyard was Lake Erie. So I got to go swimming in Lake Erie all the time. And I was there in '67, which is when the Cuyahoga River caught on fire and burned for 3 days. And I was swimming 9 miles away from that. Wow. So while I was swimming there, I'm swimming amongst all these dead and dying fish. And it was just horrible for a 14-year-old to go through. I was shocked and saddened and sickened. And yet I'd go in my living room and watch Jacques Cousteau at night. And the juxtaposition was just so much for me to kind of comprehend that it tore at me seeing all these fish dying when I was seeing coral reefs, throughout the world, just alight. So I knew at that time I had to get out of there. I was 14 years old, and I knew was not long for that town. And as soon as I was mature enough, I moved to California, which was in '79. And I had started scuba diving in Ohio. That just shows you how much of a nut I was for scuba diving. Dirty water. The people that were first responders, fire department and rescue people, when they were diving, they would come up with huge rashes and burns on their skin because the water was so toxic. There were all kinds of acids being thrown in the water. and that was from the industrial facilities, car manufacturers, steel plants. They were throwing all their solvents and waste into the water, directly into the water. So even though I was hearing about these guys getting burned from, it wasn't covered, anything that was exposed was getting burned. I still wanted to dive just because I knew it was such a magical place. So when I moved to California, I immediately started diving off of Laguna Beach, and I was seeing traps down there. This is me always looking out for the betterment of fish and the animals down there, and nobody was doing anything about the traps. These were abandoned traps that I was seeing, and nobody was doing anything about it. And it bothered me. I didn't actively do anything about it yet, but it just kind of started. I started volunteering with Marine Force Society, which was a small group led by Rudolf Streichenberger, who was doing what they could to come up with innovative solutions about helping kelp come back. Because at that time, in '82, I believe it was, we had a really strong El Nino come through, and it wiped out something like 90% of the kelp. And wasn't coming back. So I wanted to see if I could help, restore it. So I volunteered with him for a long time, and then it just escalated from there. My volunteering went through helping pelicans, sea lions, to sea shepherd, who was going throughout the world and protecting whales and dolphins. I volunteered with them for 19 years.
Wow, I did not know that.
Yeah, 19 years was a long time. It was a good education on how to. I mean, I always liken sea shepherd to being the guys that poke needles, not chiropractors.
Acupuncturists?
Acupuncturists. There you go. Acupuncturists of the environmental world. They hit a nerve on something, and then the world reacts to it,
Right.
and that's what was really good at doing. So I volunteered with them for a long time and got to know a lot of the people in the movement. And around '99, I came across another trap that had a bunch of lobsters stuck in it. And it was a abandoned trap, and a couple of us set those lobsters free. Yeah. And when we got back up to the dive boat, and there were like 25 divers on that boat, everybody was talking about it because they had never seen anybody release lobsters. So I thought, well, hey, maybe I can do something about this. And then, so I asked the Sea Shepherd, hey, can you guys donate a boat to us? And they did. And
wow.
That was the start. 2000, we started it.
I'm sorry, you cut out. 2000 what?
Is when ODA was started. We got the boat, and then we started working on it in my driveway, and then we got our official 501c3 status in 2002.
2002, wonderful. Wow, so 18 years, that's amazing. Yeah,
Are you there?
Yes, I can hear you. When you talk about finding lobsters, I thought you were going to say, you brought them up, and but I'm so happy to hear that you released them. That is beautiful. Lobsters are incredibly intelligent animals, and I'm glad they were able to go free. So tell me a little bit about the work that you've been doing the last 18 years.
Okay.
There we
go.
Back now? Yes, you're back.
Okay. So I missed what you were talking about after that.
Oh, I was just saying.
Diatribe.
Right. So, I was just saying that lobsters are incredibly intelligent. I grew up in New England, so lobster is a big deal there, eating lobster, and I grew up eating a lot of lobster rolls. And then right. I watched a video on lobster intelligence and lobster mating and the beauty of lobster mating. And I was like, well, there go my lobster eating days. I don't think I'll be doing that anymore. So I was happy to hear that you released them. That's beautiful. That's really, really neat. So tell us now, the last 18 years, what what is Ocean Defenders doing?
Well, we primarily focus on ghost gear. We're getting rid of the abandoned lobster traps and nets that are laid out throughout Southern California. And I work with the Department of Fish and Wildlife. Unlike with Sea Shepherd, who we were, pretty much renegades there. I decided I got tired of looking over my shoulder, always wondering when I was going to get arrested. So
Right.
I started working with the authorities. So we have permits to go into all the MPAs in Southern California through the Department of Fish and Wildlife.
So I'm going to hold on for 1 second. Explain what an MPA is.
Marine protected areas.
Okay.
I think it was 2013. Don't hold me to the date exactly.
That sounds right. That sounds right.
The state of California decided to set aside 16% of our coastline as marine protected areas. And marine protected areas, for the people that aren't familiar with this, are just areas where they allow limited or no fishing. And there's a big difference between those two definitions. They have a completely different result of abundance of life. If there's limited amounts of fishing that go on in MPA, it isn't nearly as effective, obviously, as the ones that don't allow any fishing. So the goal is to try to allow the fish populations to come back to, pre-fishing status. And it works tremendously. When there's a no-take area, no fishing allowed, just for instance, the lobsters like we're talking about here, there will be 5 times the number of lobsters in an MPA as outside it. And not only are there that many more of them, they get twice as big. So they're growing exponentially inside those areas.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's really important to establish these MPAs. And California is one of the leaders in the world on that.
And that's just 16%. We're not saying never go out and fish or set a trap. It's just in these areas, these designated areas, to not go out there. Got it. So
correct.
Tell us, you've got permits. So what happens? Do you get a phone call that says, hey, can you come out and scan this MPA area? Can you go? How does that work?
Well, I've been doing this so long that I've taken aerial flights up and down the coast, all the way from the Mexican border up to Bodega Bay. One of the thrills of my life is getting to see California from 1,000 feet. Life doesn't get any cooler than that.
Right.
But what I'm doing is going out there and tracking where all these lobster and crab traps are set. And so I know where there's high concentrations of them set. The guys usually lose between 10 and 15% of their traps every year. So I know, okay, I saw 1,000 of them here. We can go back and pretty easily expect to get a lot of abandoned traps out of that.
Right.
So that's what we've been doing over the years, following the lobster fishery and crab fishery, and then going back in the off season to clean up those areas. So that's one way that we do it. But we also have a trap tracker link on our website that allows people, everyday people, when they're out there swimming around, diving, paddleboarding, whatever they're doing, if you see an abandoned trap, call us. And that just happened recently. It was really interesting. Here we are in this shutdown where everybody's locked in their houses pretty much. But some people have been able to get out onto the ocean. And a paddleboarder actually came across 2 abandoned lobster traps. Actually, excuse me, they weren't abandoned. They were live. And this is after the season. The season closed in March. So he saw them there, and he called me and said, hey, can you guys get these out of here? So that was one way that we got them out. Some guy randomly came across them. And this was actually the second time that he's done that. He did it a couple of years ago. So that's how other people can help out, is you see something, let us know about it, and we'll facilitate it or get it out ourselves.
So what you're telling people is, hey, if you see any markers, floating buoys, that sort of thing right now, anywhere along the coast, it shouldn't be there?
No, there's other fisheries that are out there active right now
I
that are
see.
legal. We have shrimp fisheries out there, and there's also a live fish fishery that uses traps. So you have to look at the marker. What I recommend is, if you can get close enough to it, take a picture of the marker, and that will let me identify what type of trap it is.
I see. Okay, great idea. Yeah, great idea. And then what do? They go to your website, which is,
Oceandefenders.org.
okay.
Yeah, and then it's pretty easy to navigate. There's I forget, get involved or something like that.
Uh-huh.
A tab up there, and then you can pull that menu pulls down into report ghost gear.
Gotcha. So, Kurt, how many traps actually get put down in the course of a given year?
Hundreds of thousands. For lobster fishery, and I don't have the numbers in my head, so I'm not going to claim that this is accurate, but it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 150,000 here in Southern California. And up in Northern California, where the Dungeness crab fishery is, it's something like 300,000. It's a lot more traps that get set up there. And what I've been really bothered by is the Dungeness crab fishery is responsible for 60% of the whale entanglements in California.
Right.
So I went up there just trying to get a grip on, in my mind, of how dense are these things set? How, what are these whales facing when they go up there? So when we flew, we went from Morro Bay to, and this was just 2 years ago we did this. A group called Lighthawk has a bunch of volunteer pilots that volunteer their time for research groups to go take us up. So it didn't cost us anything. And they took me from Morro Bay to Monterey one day. And then another day we went from Monterey to Bodega Bay. And I didn't see a whole lot of traps between Morro Bay and Monterey, 100, in one area or something like that. So the whales can, I didn't feel they were endangered there. But when I got up to Drake's Bay and Bodega Bay, it was a minefield. I was seeing 1,000 traps in Drake's Bay, and in Bodega Bay, there was even more, probably 1,200, 1,500 traps in there. And this is a prime area that the gray and humpback whales go through. So it's a huge problem.
It is a huge problem. And I don't know if you're aware of this or not. You probably are. But maybe about 4 or 5 years ago, after Dave had been involved in witnessing well over a dozen entanglements, including, nets as well, like filament, polypropylene, actual a trap. I don't know if you've ever seen that horrible picture of a whale with a trap actually on it. It's, and you can see how that would happen, right? The trap is there, the whale comes down and it just gets stuck. And this poor whale is looking like a Franken whale. It's really horrible. And so Dave started to do some research on alternatives, right? Because we want to walk the line between livelihoods and the animals and try and come up with something that would work for everyone. And he came across a gentleman in Tasmania who had created something called the Fio buoy. Have you seen a picture of the Fio buoys?
Oh yeah, yeah. It's the wave of the future.
Right. So we actually went down to Sydney. John flew up and met us. Super, super nice guy. And John had developed this FIO buoy, not for this purpose, but actually to save lives, because he was out fishing one day at night, doing an overnight trip on a 6-pack boat with some buddies, and their anchor line got hooked up in a trap, and the weather started getting pretty bad, and they were literally chained to a trap, and they couldn't break free. They could not physically break free, and so they were getting battered around by the storm. It's one thing to be in a storm and get pushed along, but when you're anchored in one place like that, he said, I almost died. And he said, I kept thinking, well, what's the workaround here? So he developed this FIO buoy, which is, for those of you watching who don't know, it looks like a ginormous spool of thread, and it's got polypropylene line, and it sits on the floor of the ocean, and it can sit right on top of the trap, if you will. And so it doesn't extend up from the trap up to the surface with gear or line or anything that a whale might get entangled in. It sits on the floor, at the bottom anyway. And the fisherman can come along, and with his remote, he can click, and that little float will pop up, and all of that polypropylene will unspool, and then the fisherman grabs his buoy, and then he pulls it up, and then checks his pot, checks his trap, takes what he wants, resets it, puts it back down again, click, and it spools back down again. So John actually came out to Monterey, I want to say maybe a year and a half ago, and they got some money to test this up in Monterey, and 2 other devices were being tested at the same time, and the 2 others were not successful in deploying, but John's worked every single time. It executed everything that it was supposed to execute. So the problem is, so that's the solution. The problem is it's expensive. And when John just makes one at a time, they're about $10,000. And there has to now also be a mechanism put in place so that, I'm Joe Fisherman, and I walk in and I want, let's say we can get the price down to $500 a piece. We put in an order for a bunch of them, and we're able to get a bunch, but I have to register where those are going to go. And there has to be some kind of a tracking mechanism in place so that people like you aren't kept busy, all year long, as they might shift along the ocean floor with the currents or whatever, right? We want to at least have an idea of where they are. So what are your thoughts about something like that?
It's fantastic. And that's the huge problem with the entire crab fishery. Excuse me, I left my phone on for some stupid reason.
Okay.
Oops.
That's okay.
A little glitch there. The challenge is getting that marker, that floating line out of the water. It doesn't need to be there. It's sitting there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Doing nothing, yeah.
Yeah, it's absolutely impossible for the whales to avoid these things unless they've become entangled before, and sometimes they learn that, yeah. I see that, I'm not going there again.
Right.
But the young ones, they don't have that experience. Yeah. But we got to get those lines out of the water, and then that way the fishermen, they aren't hurting animals. They don't want to do that.
No.
Nobody wants to entangle a whale.
No.
So they feel bad about it, but they know that, like you say, they have to make a living.
Right.
So we just have to get this down to workable numbers. The fishermen don't want to spend any money on these things. And, to a degree, I get it, but at the same time, you got to recognize it's what's called the true cost of doing business. You have to look at it through its entire life cycle. If that thing is in the water and it kills a whale, right now there's no fine put on these guys. No, they don't suffer at all from it. And the Center for Biological Diversity, which is a great organization, they finally filed a lawsuit last year against the National Marine Fisheries to do something about this. And they were successful. The lawsuit, it passed, or it was agreed to, and almost immediately the numbers of traps set in the water dropped, as well as the whale entanglements dropped. I think it was 2016, we finally hit a really bad benchmark. It's something like 75 whales were entangled that year.
That's right.
Whereas normally it's 10 to 12.
Right.
And so we had that horrific spike. And again, that's just the known ones. You don't know how many are entangled, because a lot of them drop to the bottom and you never see them again. Biological diversity lawsuit in there. And hopefully the fishermen recognize that there is value in keeping these animals alive. Businesses like yours, there's a lot of businesses that thrive around a healthy whale population, and we want to promote sustainable businesses. So that's where I think the government needs to get involved. They need to subsidize these fishermen. Get these, we got the technology here. Right now, we want to have healthy businesses. So, okay, here's X amount of dollars to help you buy 50 traps with these special markers on.
Yep, exactly. And that was Dave's feeling as well. Is subsidizing, maybe establishing a not-for-profit. He's been talking to John about doing that. That would then help them, get these new traps as well, and just get it going until it becomes the norm, because what is a whale worth? Well, when you start factoring in tourism and the response that people have to it, as well as the carbon contributions that it makes, and then what a whale does to actually change the flow of the ocean so that algae is getting circulated around nutrient-rich waters coming up as the whale surfaces, what it all does for our algae to be then acting in a manner that produces oxygen, which is pretty important for us. So there's just so much value in a whale's life. Okay, so you had given me a couple of video clips. You want to tell us about them? Which one should we start with? The one in Laguna or the one?
Let's start in Laguna.
Laguna.
You can go ahead and start showing it, and I'll talk about it.
Okay, let me go ahead and get that up here. Share my screen. And okay. All right, and I'm gonna hit play. So this is beautiful Laguna Beach.
Right. This is the south end of the marine protected area. Laguna Beach has a 7-mile stretch of no take zone. It's a fantastic area. And the fishermen lay their traps right along the border of it, knowing that the lobsters are in there and they're going to come out. They migrate out at different parts of the cycle. So all those white dots you're seeing there are the trap markers, and they're attached to a trap down there. So each one of those represents one trap. And we counted from the shoreline out to, I think it was 1.2 miles, there were 180 traps set in that distance. And when you consider how a whale, every one of those purple dots there signifies one of those traps. I marked those with our GPS marker.
Wow.
So those traps, become a curtain basically that the whales have to navigate themselves through. And a humpback whale will have a wingspan of 50 feet. That's pretty wide. And then you look here, the purpose of this video is to try to give people a sense of, you're seeing those markers at the surface, but what does it look like underneath? And this is what it's like. Some of these traps are set, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 feet apart. So how does a whale navigate through that? That was the goal of this this phase of the project. Just try to get the public aware of what's going on under the water.
So John,
we've had some really nice donations that allowed us to, go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask you, Kurt, there is no restriction on how closely they can be laid down?
No, and that's what we're trying to get addressed. And the Laguna Blue Belt people and a couple other organizations are going to work with us to try to put pressure on whoever we're going to pressure to get them to realize you can't put these things that close together. I don't care if you put them against, the MPA right at the border, but let's have context here. And this is just an example, another trap that had been down there for a year, but look at, there are a bunch of lobsters trapped in that thing. And when we come across those, we disable the trap first, which means we take that door off. And then of course we get the lobsters out of there, let them live to see another day. And if we can't,
that beautiful boy.
Yeah,
isn't girl. He? Yeah. That's so cool.
It's the highlight of our day when we get to free lobsters. I tell you, it's a lot of fun. And of course, we go and disable the trap, and that's what Al's doing right there. He's taking the door off so it can't trap any more animals. But look at how close those things are set.
Yeah. So the lobster can actually find its.
How do we lobster?
It's impossible. And what people may or may not realize is that what happens is the whale will go through. We've actually seen this happen off Dana Point. We've actually seen it happen. A whale is cruising along, a humpback cruising along, hits a line and flips out, right? Just, flips out. And it might have gotten wrapped around his pectoral, or maybe it's dragging on his flukes, and this whale will breach, and you can see the line, pulling against the whale, and the whale will then breach again in an effort to free itself. And in this particular situation that I'm remembering, that whale probably breached, I don't know, 12, 15 times. And then it was able to free itself. But unfortunately, what happens is just the opposite sometimes. As the whale is breaching, or worse, maybe the line went through its mouth. We had John Kalamakidis on last week, and John was telling us about an animal he just worked with the Friday before, who had gotten a line through its baleen. Well, once it's in there, it's not coming out. A whale does not understand let me back up and, let that slide through the other way. And so it just starts pulling and pulling, and it's dragging this trap behind it. And it can hardly swim. It can hardly fluke. It can hardly get to the surface sometimes to breathe. And it's a horrible, horrible thing to see. And so, and then as they thrash, they might actually wrap it around themselves even more. So it ends up being a real mess of a situation. So it's so exciting to see what you're doing out there, trying to at least save these animals and get some of this gear, because just because it's no longer attached to something at the top doesn't mean it's not going to get snagged by something. Now, have you ever found any sea turtles or anything like that in any of these traps or gear?
Yeah, but one thing I just wanted to touch on also when you're talking about the whale becoming entangled, that line is made out of polypropylene,
Yeah,
really strong stuff. It's the size of your thickness of your finger. It's going to
right,
last for 450 years in the environment if left down there. And because it's polypropylene, it's lighter than water, so it floats in the water column. While even if the float isn't attached to it, it's still floating in the water column. So
right.
it's still a problem for whales. So
Yeah,
just wanted to
yeah.
to
Thank you. Thank you for
finish
mentioning that.
that
Yeah.
thought.
And
Um,
and if you've ever
as far as other
touched,
animals, I'm
I was
sorry,
just going to
what?
say, if you've ever touched polypropylene, a polypropylene line, it's very rough. And it's and when your hands are wet and you start rubbing against it, the abrasion is pretty quick. And the skin of a whale or a dolphin is not any different. You know, it's a little more resilient than ours underwater, obviously, because they live underwater. But you know, it just starts to cut in like a file into their pectoral flippers, their flukes. We've seen a fluke amputee, so you know, still managing to swim along, but we've seen animals get, you know, just amputated at 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 best. Sometimes, other times, you know, it's just it's not a good situation. So, what were you going to say before I interrupted you?
Well, you were asking about other animals that we've seen stuck in these things. We've actually seen cormorants stuck in a trap.
Mm,
Of course, they drown down there. Um, we've seen sea lion skulls around them, so they've gotten entangled in the lines. And we've seen dolphin skulls around these traps too, so they've got trapped, you know, entangled in the line. It's a myriad of animals, and then there's also fish, and we've pulled up some traps with I can't remember the exact numbers, but dozens of sheep's crab in them. So they're getting
ah,
in those things, and sheep's crab are a lot bigger than a lobster. So there's no way they're going to get out of there.
right,
So
right.
they suffer that as well.
Well, tell us about this next video. Should I start it?
I'm not hearing you right now.
I said, should I start this next video? The one from Hawaii?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Can you hear me okay?
That one I hear you on this one.
Yeah, there is narration with this.
There we go. So I'm told that they cannot hear what's on the video. So why don't you tell us what we're looking at? I think I lost Kurt, but this is some video that he's taken on.
Uh, okay. Can you hear me okay right now?
Now I hear you. Yes, you're back.
Okay.
Yep.
Uh, this is what we're facing in Hawaii. We have a lot of monofilament line that's set down there from the recreational fisheries. And it gets caught on the corals, and then the guys have to cut their lines loose because they can't pull it up. And now you've got turtles coming in there and manta rays, all kinds of fish that are getting wrapped up in this stuff. So we've got 3 dive shops that we work with in Hawaii, 2 on the Big Island, Jack's Diving Locker, and Kohala Divers in the north part of the island. And then on Oahu, we're working with the Island Divers Hawaii. And here, this is just an example of a dolphin getting caught up. This one had a hook actually embedded in her flesh with a line wrapped around her pectoral fin. And the dolphin came up to this guy, literally came up to him and rolled over and was begging him to get this out. So he had the proper gear with him. It was a dive master.
Oh my gosh.
And isn't it amazing? I mean, it's remarkable behavior. And it happened, the same guy, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting his name right now. The same guy was down there on a manta ray dive and pulled that off of a manta ray. And she came up to him and literally stood still and let him get that off.
Wow.
It goes to show you that manta rays aren't these big dumb animals.
No, not at all. Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, this poor turtle. This is awful.
Yeah, and this is what happens. The turtles get wrapped up in it, and this one starved to death and had her fin literally cut off by that monofilament line before she died. So
what an awful death.
Even though, you know, we're not pulling up the huge weight numbers that our donors are typically used to, we're pulling up thousands and thousands of feet of line of this stuff. And it's having a really good impact down there. We're really happy about the resilience of life down there. At the same time, we're pulling a lot of plastics too.
Yep. Wow. Oh yeah. Yeah. While we're on the subject, I'm just going to mention balloons. We have the slogan that everyone's adopted, balloons blow. People have no idea when they're releasing a balloon inland that balloon is going to end up in our ocean. It's going to fly up, catch the current. As it deflates, come down, end up in the ocean. The paint comes off. It becomes this clear cellophane type bubble that looks just like jellyfish. And some of these animals that feed on jellyfish, will attempt to eat it, and then they end up with these balloons in their stomach, and they die. So we tell people, please, if you're going to get a balloon, never let it go. Always keep it, hold on to it, and then if you just can't live a balloonless life, please do that. So that's awesome. That was a great video. Thank you so much, Kurt. Wow. Okay, so what's one takeaway? What can people do to make a difference if they're down at the beach? What can they do?
Well, be observant. First of all, pick up the trash, while you're down there. People are leaving an inordinate amount of plastics behind. And plastics are, the scientists are estimating there's going to be more plastic in the water than fish by the year 2050. And from what I'm seeing, I don't even think it's going to be that long. I think it's going to be sooner. So do what you can to get rid of the plastic, reduce your consumption, use of plastic. But when you're at the beach, and if you're seeing, abandoned traps out there, if you're snorkeling or paddle boarding or kayaking, and you see this abandoned stuff out there, go to our website and let us know. If it's somewhere else in the world and you're seeing it, find out another organization that is doing something about that and let them know about it. Because it obviously is beneficial to everybody, but we don't want more animals dying. These horrible deaths. People just don't comprehend what an animal goes through as stuck on that thing, on it and has to live out its dying days in there. The other thing is you can volunteer with us. we're based out of Huntington Beach, but our boat is in Dana Point. So if you're a boater or a diver or just want to go out on the ocean and see what it's like to do something, you know, it's not glamorous, this is dirty work, but it's very rewarding. So that's another thing. And obviously donations always come in handy. We're always hurting for money. And then, you know, be aware of the environmental issues. If you love the oceans, you got to study it and find out what's going on in your area and support the organizations that are doing something about it, and also keep up with the government to put pressure on them to enforce laws and enact new laws that protect our oceans.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much, Kurt. This has been really wonderful. We will post a link to your website underneath the video. So if people want to go there and donate, boats are expensive to run, right? So I know.
Don't own a boat.
Yeah, don't own a boat. But this is such a great way for them to be doing something really positive. So anyway, thank you, and we will see you out on the water. I didn't know your boat was right in the harbor.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll have to hook up down there then.
Sounds good.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Welcome.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.